All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Kislev. Josh and Becca Friedman, for dedicating all the Shiurim and drushos this month in relation of the yahrzeit of Josh's father, Yisroel Yehuda, HaRav Chaim Rephael, for an aliyah for the Neshamas of all of those who were murdered al Kiddush Hashem on Simchas Torah, and in the zechus of a safe return for all of our hostages and chayalim. Semi Malka Esterson, in memory of their parents, Hinda bas Henoch Ephraim, Yitzchok Leib ben Aaron HaKohen, and Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avram. And the Pepper family, in memory of their brother and uncle, Yosef Pepper, Yosef David ben Yaakov, Zichron Lebrach. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the Neshama and aliyah and the families a Neshama. Also, a very special mazel tov to Ari and Shoshana Lerner on the birth of a granddaughter. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Shebizocha legad leTorah, ulechuppah, ulemaisim tovim. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Well, so with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Did I mention a lot to do today? All right, so let us begin. Suppose today's daf is Lamed Daled. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem from Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, and we left off with Amar Mar, the two dots. The two dots, approximately 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 lines up from the bottom. Amar Mar. So most of the Gemara is going to go ahead and starting from the Brisa, or continuing with the Brisa. So right? TORAH Rabbanon? No, that must be wrong shir. No way I left off that. Really? TORAH Rabbanon? All right, TORAH Rabbanon. Okay, there goes my plan for today, but all right, that's good. TORAH Rabbanon, two dots. Short time shehizik. So we'll say if a short time goes in and does damage, so the Gemara says, Ad shelo amad b'din. So we'll say, so now this is actually an interesting case. So now you have Ruvain's shar went ahead and damaged Shimon's shar. Or again, whether it's Shimon Shor or Shimon, whatever it is, Reuven Shor damages. Achlo Amr B'din Machro. So let's say let's say before the case was brought to court, so Reuven has a great idea. What does he do? He sells off the shore. What's the halacha? Machar. It works. Now let's say again, we're going to see that doesn't mean he's free from liability. But what it means, right? In other words, he sold something that's technically encumbered, but the sale works. Hikdisho mukdash. Similarly, again, if he was makdashit, it works. Shachtu b'nastam b'matana. If he shechted the shar and gave it away as a gift, so masha asa asui. Ultimately, again, whatever is done is done. Misha aman b'din. However, again, once the court case has been initiated already, so machra eno machar, if he tries to sell it, the sale is void. Hikdisho eno mukdash, if he tries to consecrate it, it's not hagdish. Shachto v'naslo matana lo asav lo klum. And if when he shechted it and gave it as a gift, ultimately again, his gift is meaningless. Okay, so I'll say, so an interesting distinction. So apparently, Reuven goes ahead and essentially either sells the shar, is makdish the shar, or shechts it and gifts it. If all of that is done before the legal proceedings have begun, the transaction is valid. If the legal proceedings have begun already, then Allah Lamaisa, his actions are meaningless. Okay. Kidmu Balechavos Vegbiu. So interesting case. Let's say Reuven has pre-existing debts. And let's say he doesn't have the money or he didn't pay some of those debts, and therefore some of his previous creditors go ahead and seize the shar in satisfaction of pre-existing debts. So it's talacha. Kadmu ba'ali chovos vigbiu, bein chav achelo hizik. Whether the debt was incurred before the damage, bein hizik achelo chav, or whether the damage occurred before the debt, lo asav lo klum. Ultimately, again, the seizure of the creditors is invalid. Because we'll say ultimately, again, he's only paid from the body, from the guf. Now, that statement at first glance doesn't seem to make much sense. We're going to see, the Gemara is going to explain what it means. Fine. Muad shehizik. We'll say this is all one brisa. I just want to tell you just coming attractions for today. This is all one brisa, and then the Gemara is going to go ahead and dissect each part of the brisa. So next, muad shehizik. If a muad goes ahead and does damage, so ultimately, again, so I'll say, so all of this up until now was a tam. So remember again, in the tam case, we made this distinction between whether or not Reuven went ahead and either sold, gifted, or was makdish, right, prior to the initiation of legal proceedings or after the initiation of legal proceedings. Now we'll say we have a muad. So Reuven's animal is a muad that did damage. So listen to this. Whether legal proceedings were initiated or not, machro machar. If Reuven sold the animal, it works. Higdisho mukdash. If at the end of the day, again, it was makdashed, it works. Shachta v'nasal matana, if he shechted and gave it away as a gift, masha asa asui. Ultimately, it's good. Suppose they say, interesting. So apparently, in the case of muad, the Brisa suggests, whether legal proceedings were initiated or weren't initiated, whatever Ruvain did works. He gifted it, it works. He makdish it works. He sold it works. So the Gemara says, same case. Right? Let's say again, Ruvain has pre-existing creditors, and those pre-existing creditors came and seized the ox in satisfaction of a debt. So the Gemara says, Bein chav achalo hizik, whether the debt occurred before the damage, Bein hizik achalo chav, masha asui asui, lefi shein mishtanim ela min aliyah. Because we'll say ultimately again, whatever the seizure was, it works. Why? Because in a muad, Rabbi say now the statements begin to make a little bit more sense. Wherein lies the difference between damage done by a tam and damage done by a muad? So damage done by a tam is chatzi nezek. But also remember again, we learned a little while ago that chatzi nezek is capped at what? Capped at the value of the actual damaging animal. As opposed to muad, where you pay from your best property, and obviously there's no cap on damages. Whatever you own, you owe. Good. So we'll say that's our brisa. Now let's go ahead and dissect it. Really interesting. So Amar Mar, Machar. When we say, we'll say by the tam case. Let's go back. Let's analyze this. So what was the case by the tam? So again, Reuben has an ox. The ox is a first-time offender. It gored Shimon. Gored Shimon's ox. So now what's the halacha? What do the braysos say? If Reuven sold it before legal proceedings began, then ultimately, again, the sale is a valid sale. So the Gemara says, Amar machro l'rediya. So when we're talking about a sale, we'll say the sale ultimately is what did Reuven sell it for? Reuven ultimately sold it for plowing purposes. Okay. Rashi says over here, yeah, fine, for plowing purposes, good. Hegdisho, mukdash, ultimately, again, if halacha l'maisa, Reuven was makdash, that works also. Why? We should Rabbi Avo. So we'll say that was the end of yesterday's daf. Because Rabbi Avo said, ultimately, again, we're afraid that if the hektish doesn't set in, what's going to happen? People will think that you could redeem hektish without pidyon, without redemption. So therefore, again, the hektish works. If he shechts it and gifts it, masha asui. Whatever is done is done. So the Gemara says, all right, let's analyze this. So the Gemara says, so I understand if he's gifting it, so the gift could work. Let's say he gifted it for plowing purposes. But in a case of shchita, even if it was shechted, still Shimon could collect payment from the animal in the form of meat. Right? He could collect the payment in the form of meat. Tisanya, chai, emi ela chai. The pasuk when speaking about again one animal goring another animal, it says umachru es hashar hachai. They will sell the living ox, which is the damaging ox. V'chatzu es kaspo. They split the money. Chatzi nezek. So the Gemara says umachru es. Chai imi ela chai. So we'll say, I only know that when you pay chatzi nezek, that comes from a living animal. Shachto minayin. How do we know that? Let's say, we'll say, and again, just a stam case. Reuven's ox gores Shimon, first time offender, gores Shimon's ox. Therefore, Reuven owes chatzi nezek. Now what happens? Reuven shechs the animal. Bless you, he shechs the animal. So what's the halacha? Shachto minayin. How do we know that even if Reuven shechted the animal, ultimately, again, Shimon can capture payments from the shechted animal? Talmud Omar, umachra es hashar mikol makom. So the Gemara is asking over here, even if Reuven shechted it, why does shechting preclude Shimon from going ahead and getting repayment from the meat? So the Gemara says, Amar of Shizi lo nitzracha ella lepacha shchita. No. What we're talking about over here is the depreciation of the value of the animal as a result, ultimately, of shchita. In other words, obviously, a shechted animal is worth less than a living animal. Okay, Amar Huna Yeshua Zos Amaris teaches us hamazik shibudo shel chavero pater. So Rabbi said this actually gives rise to a very interesting idea, which the Gemara says as follows: if you go ahead and you damage something that your friend has an encumbrance on, right, thereby diminishing the value of the encumbered item, you're pater. Even though, again, on a technical level, you may be causing someone a loss. For example, so the Gemara says pshita. That's obvious. In other words, I damage something, or I damage something which my friend has a financial lien on. I'm pater. I'm not chayv in damages for that to my friend. to my friend, even though now again his encumbrance is worth less. So the Gemara says that's obvious. In other words, that would be a case of indirect damage. At most, that's grama. To which the Gemara says, what would you have thought? Lo chasarticha v'lo midi. So in this case, also one could have said, in the animal case, right? So Reuben could say to Shimon, listen, I know you have a claim against my animal because it damaged you, but Lamaisa didn't really diminish anything from you after all. The Gemara says, the animal is the animal, right? The same ox is still here. The only thing I did is I took the breath out of the animal, so to speak. In other words, it was alive before, it's not alive now, but the mamoshus, the body of the animal, is still the same. But maybe in general, one would be chayiv if they damage something which their fellow has an encumbrance on. Kamashmala, no. Kamashmala that halacha lemaisa, if you damage something that someone else has an encumbrance on, you are not chayiv. I think Mar says, Hanami Rabba Amra. Rabba already said this. This is actually a case of listening to the Amr Rabba. Hasorif shtaroso shel chavero pater. If you burn the loan documents of your friend, ultimately it's not going to be a friend for long, but you burn the loan documents of your friend, ultimately, again, you are pater. You are pater. Now, what's the pshat with this? The Gemara says, now, what's the chap of that? A loan document by itself doesn't have a value, right? What does the loan document represent? It represents the ability to collect. So in other words, it represents the encumbrance. So if you go ahead and you damage the encumbrance of your friend, technically speaking, you're pater. So the Gemara says, we already learned this. What would you have thought? Because in the case where I burned the loan documents, I could just say to Ruvain, or Ruvain could just say to Shimon, sorry, what did I do? All I did was I burnt paper. Boros, but I was saying in a case where there was perhaps actual physical damage, perhaps one should be chayiv. Kamash balon tahahacha kimad dechafer boros sichin ma'aros dami v'kamer masha asui. So we'll say. So the point over here is you see from here that Allah Lamaisa, if you damage something which your friend has a financial lien on, ultimately, again, you are not chayiv any damages for that. Where does that come out? Where does that come out over here? Reuven's ox damaged Shimon, which now means in a case of Tam, that Shimon has a lien against the shar, a lien against Reuven's shar. Reuven then goes ahead and shechts it. So even though now Reuven has diminished the value of the encumbered item, Reuven is not chayiv to Shimon anything. Okay, interesting idea. So the Gemara says, good. Kidmu balei chovos vigbiu. So now we continue to go through the Raisa. If Reuven has pre-existing creditors, and the pre-existing creditors came along and collected the ox in satisfaction of a debt. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Ad shelo hizik, bein chav ad shelo hizik, bein hizik ad shelo chav, lo asav lo klum. So we'll say in this case over here, whether the debt came before the damage or the damage came before the debt, the seizure of the damaging ox is void. They can't seize it. So the Gemara says, why? Because we'll say why. What the Gemara seems to be saying over here is because Shimon, the victim, has a claim against the actual body of the damaging ox. So Gemara says, let's analyze this. So I understand if the damages occurred before the debt, so I understand why creditors can't seize the ox. Why? Because Shimon has a claim on the ox prior to the creditors. However, chav, aval chav achlo hizik, bal chov kadim. But I will say if it's a case where the creditor went ahead and really preceded the damage, then why shouldn't the creditor be able to go ahead and seize the ox in satisfaction of his debt? After all, again, what? The creditor is a first position creditor. Remember, again, his debt preceded the damage. To which the Gemara says, good. Top of Lamadalit. I will say the truth is, even in a case ultimately, again, of the damages before the creditor, nevertheless, bal chov kadim. Now we'll say now why. So ultimately, again, in general, one could go ahead and say that the creditor takes the first position over damages. Shmamina, what do you see from here? Bal chov mo'ocher shekadam v'gava mashagava lo gava. We'll say what you see from here is something very interesting. What you learn from this brisa is the following: that Allah Chalamaysa, if a second position creditor seizes an asset, he jumps the line, the seizure is ineffective. In other words, One might have thought that although a second position creditor is entitled to assets only after first position creditors are paid, but one of them, maybe if he just proactively jumped the line, maybe he should be entitled to keep that which he seized. Kamash Malan, he's not. So the Gemara says, Mashagava lo gava, the olam eimulacha, Mashagava gava. Maybe not. Maybe the halacha is that a second position creditor, if he had enough chutzpah, and he went ahead and he grabbed the asset, maybe he's allowed to hold on to it. The shiny hasa, maybe this case is different. Why? Da'amarlei, ilu gaba chava, lo minach chava gavi. As well say, you could say that if the shar was with you, would I not have had the opportunity to go ahead and take that which was by? Look at Rashi. He says, ilu gaba chava, tikvar govis le kodim shehizik. Right? If you had taken it, if you had taken possession of it, I would have been able to take it from you. The TORAH, the askan minei mishtalamna. See, I will say, this case is a little bit different. Why is this case different? Because remember, by tam nezek, how much do you get paid? Chatzi nezek. And where do those damages come from? Remember, I will say, they are from the guf of the damaging animal. So this is a different kind of encumbrance, right? As opposed to, let's say, other debts which may encumber property. Although, remember, again, I will say, the other piece to keep in mind over here is, in general, when you have if you're a creditor and you have an encumbrance, generally your encumbrance only devolves upon, generally, real property. Right? It's not usually metaltalin, unless, of course, go back to yesterday's daf. I know we're doing a lot very quickly, I'm sorry. Unless, of course, right, we saw in yesterday's daf, when does an encumbrance devolve upon movable property? Apotiki, excellent. Right? When it's identified. This type of damage, tam damage, is very unique. Because tam damage, the way it is positioned biblically, is that it's mina gufo. It's paid from the body of the damaging ox. So this is a different kind of lien. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, that's why the Brisa says, if another creditor comes and seizes the ox in satisfaction of a debt, here's the incredible chiddush. Whether the debt preceded the damage or the debt didn't precede the damage, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The seizure is ineffective. Why? Because l'maisa, the damaged party, in this case Shimon, has a different type of entitlement to this ox, because his payment for damages, mamish, comes from the body of the ox. Incredible. Tan Rabbanon. Sharshav Masayim. We'll say another case, another brisa. Sharshav Masayim, Shenagach, Sharshav Masayim. So let's listen to this. An ox, Reuven's ox, worth 200 zuz. Gor's Shimon's ox that is worth 200 zuz. V'chava bo b'chamishim zuz. So I'll say, so now listen to this. And as a result of the damages, so right, and there were damages caused of 50 zuz. V'shavach v'amad al arba meo zuz. Now what happened? After all of this happened, after all the appreciation happened, so then halacha l'maisa, the oxen appreciated. Right? The oxen appreciated, right? And now the ox ultimately again is worth, Rashi says over here, by the way, kichesh, Rashi says, hanizak machmas hamaka, venira akshav heziku gadol yoser mitrila b'shas hanezek. So now, what ended up happening over here, ox worth 200 zuz, injures another ox worth 200 zuz, and the damaged ox now depreciated ultimately again by 50 zuz. Fine. Now what happened? Now the ox appreciated. Va'amad al arba meos zuz. And now Baruch Hashem, now the ox is worth 400 zuz. Now watch this. Shil male heziko haya omer al shmona meos zuz. Wow. Listen to this. So now the ox appreciated, it's worth 400 zuz. And had the ox not been injured, it would now be worth what? 800 zuz. Wow, okay. So Rabbi says, so now obviously, what's the shaila? How are you assessing damages? Right? How are you assessing damages? So the Gemara says, no sin kishas hanezek. Okay, so what the halacha is, damages are assessed at the time that the damage occurred. In other words, we're going to see, it sounds kind of obvious, it's not obvious, because Rabbi said there are essentially 2 points in time where you could potentially assess damages. What are the 2 points in time? Either at the time the damage occurred, or hamad bedin, or at the time ultimately again that adjudication begins in Beis Din. So now the Gemara is saying over here that halacha l'maisa, now we're going to see there might be a difference between appreciation and depreciation. So ultimately again, in the case of appreciation, so therefore again we're going to say that damages are assessed at the time that the damage occurred. Kichesh, what happens, Rabbi say, if the damaged shore depreciated? So again, this was a case of where the damaged shore appreciated. What happens if the damaged shore depreciated? So kishas ha'amada bedin. Then ultimately, I will say what we do is we assess the value at the time of the initiation of legal proceedings. Incredible. Shavach mazik. So I'll say, what happens if the damaging animal went ahead and appreciated? So no sin lo kishas nezek. So ultimately, again, we assess damages like time damage occurs. Kichesh. What happens if it depreciated? Kisha hamada badin. Then again, we look at the time. Ultimately, again, that the adjudication started, the legal proceedings started. Amar Mar, shavach mazik. If the damaging animal appreciated. No sin kishas hanezek. So we said before, if the damaging animal appreciated, so therefore again we assess damages at the time of the damage itself. Money. Who is that? Rabbi Shmuel Silber bal chofu. Because remember again in yesterday's daf, we had this discussion over here that in general, when a tam animal damages, what is the relationship of the two parties to the damaging animal? So remember again, this was a machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel said that Ruvain owes Shimon money. But Shimon has no ownership interest in the animal itself. Rabbi Akiva says no, that Shimon actually owns what? 50% of the animal. So the Gemara says when we say, so whose opinion does this reflect? There's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel is that Ruvain owes Shimon money. Vezuzi hu demasikle, he owes him money. The Gemara says, Ema Seifa, yet look at the end. Kichesh, if the animal depreciated, Kishas hamad badin. Then we take the value of the animal at the time of adjudication. We'll say, Asan Rabbi Akiva. That goes according to Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Shutzfininhu, who says that Reuven and Shimon, both what? Are both partners in the animal. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. So in one brisa, Reish Rabbi Shmuel v'Seif Rabbi Akiva? Again, I want to say we generally don't like to do that, right? We generally don't like to go ahead and make in a brisa the Reisha like one opinion, second like another opinion. Which Gemara says, "Lo, kul Rabbi Akiva." No, in fact, it's all Rabbi Akiva. V'hamayaskinon. What's the case? Kishapitmo. Interesting. The case is where I will say Ruvain fattened his animal, right? In other words, I will say that ultimately, again, the appreciation comes because of the effort that Ruvain put in. Right, so therefore, I'm going to say it could be in that kind of case. Lemaisa, why should the damaged party share in the appreciation of the animal that was the direct result of the involvement of the owner of the animal? Kishapitmo, if that's the case where Ruvain's fattening up his own animal, Emaresha, look at the first part of the brisa. Shabach va'amar al daled meos zuz. If ultimately, again, the animal appreciated, now it's worth 400 zuz. No sin lo kishas hanezek. Ultimately, again, he's paid in accordance, again, with the time of the damage, or at the time of the damage. Damages are assessed at the time the damage occurred. Ikishapitmo, ultimately, again, if it's a case where he fattened up the animal, does this even need to be said? No, that's obvious. Amra Papa, Reisha Mashkachos la bein de pitma pitume, bein de shabcha mamela. So we'll say the Reisha could be set up as a case where the animal appreciated either because of the efforts of the mazik, the owner, right, the damager, or where the animal just appreciated on its own. So the Gemara says, and therefore, again, it's necessary to teach us that even if the animal appreciated on its own, not through the efforts of the owner, nevertheless, no sin kishas hanezek. We still lock in payments at the time that damage was done. But the safer case, I will say, ultimately, again, is where the mazik, the damager, i.e. owner of the animal, fattened up the animal itself. So therefore, he's responsible for the appreciation. And therefore, the damaged party shouldn't get to share in that. So we'll say if the animal depreciated, we again evaluate damages at the time of adjudication. So the Gemara says, why is the animal depreciating? If ultimately, again, the animal depreciated, why? Because the owner is working it very hard. He should say that, right? So the damaged party could say, I don't understand, you're depreciating the animal and I should have to lose. The case of us says no, where the animal depreciated as a result of an injury. The Amarle Karna de Turach Kavira Bay. Because he could say ultimately again, literally again, the horn of your animal is buried in mine. In other words, that the depreciation was a result ultimately again of the injury. Incredible. So we'll say, so what do we come out with over here? So first of all, again, I will say we are still left with Machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, which again we're not going to resolve for now because this is going to be an ongoing Machlokes. That when you have tam damage, so ultimately again, halacha l'maisa, what is the relationship between the two parties in the damaging animal? Rabbi Shmuel, damaged party owns no part of the damaging animal, he's just owed money. He's a creditor. Rabbi Akiva, no. The unique aspect of tam damage is that the damaged party becomes a 50% owner in the damaging animal. Keep that machlokes in mind because it is going to be ongoing. Next piece of osai to remember is that halacha l'maisa, what right does the owner of the damaging animal have after the damage occurred but before adjudication begins? Does he have the ability, so Bryce seems to indicate he has the ability to sell, he has the ability to be makdish, and he has the ability to shecht and give away b'matana. Once adjudication begins, he has none of those rights. None of those rights. Obviously, even before adjudication, even if he goes ahead and sells it, shechts it, or gifts it, sells it, makdish it, shechts it, and gifts it, he's still going to be liable money. Creditors, whether the debt preceded damage or not, creditors can't seize this ox. Why can't they seize this ox? Because damaged party has a unique lien on it. Why? Because damaged party has a unique lien on the goof of the animal itself. Good. Mishnah. Shar shav masayim. Shnagach shar shav masayim. Was an interesting case over here. An ox that is worth 200 zuz gores another ox that's worth 200 zuz. Here. So remember again, the oxen, Reuven's ox damages Shimon's ox. They're both worth the same exact amount of money. So now what happens? Let's say again it's a total loss, right? Total loss. So now Shimon's ox is dead. And ultimately, again, the carcass of Shimon's ox is worth nothing. Because remember, again, we've established that in cases of damage, remember, again, damage is offset by what? The value of the damaged ox, the carcass. Because generally, you can sell carcass for something, that offsets the loss. Let's say in this case over here, total loss. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, there's nothing to reclaim from the carcass. Was halacha, bless you. Amar Meir, al zen ne'amar, umachras hashar achai, v'chotzu es kapo. Okay. So we'll say, so again, Rabbi Meir says, this is the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek. So what happens over here? You take the living ox, and essentially you sell it, and you split the money. And I will say, that is chatzi nezek. Remember again, this is reflecting the opinion that halacha l'maisa, that chatzi nezek is demei mazik. Let's remember again, we have this ongoing machlokes, which again keeps popping up. When we talk about chatzi nezek of what? Chatzi nezek of what? Is it half of the value of the damaged animal, or half of the value of the damaging animal? So this obviously is going in the opinion, Rabbi is of the opinion, that chatzi nezek is half the value of the damaging animal. So therefore, again, in this case where it's total loss, what do? You take the surviving animal, sell it off, and split the proceeds 50%. That's it. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says, v'chein halacha, so the Gemara says, Amar le Rabbi Yehuda, v'chein halacha kayamta, umachras hashar achai v'chitzu es kapo. So Rabbi Yehuda says, fine. You fulfilled one halacha. What about the gam hameis yechetsun? So we'll say, what about the case of? Remember again, the pasuk also says that they split the carcass of the animal. So what do you do about that? Ve'ezu huzeh. So the Gemara says ve'ezu huzeh. So ve'ezeh zeh shar shav masayim shenagach shar shav masayim. So Rabbi Yehuda is just coming along to say there's another biblically paradigmatic case. What's this case? This is a shar. Reuven shar worth 200 zuz. Gor's Shimon shar worth 200 zuz, v'hanavela yafe chamishim, and let's say the carcass is worth 50 zuz. So I'll say, now here's what I'm left with. I'm left with a damaging animal that's worth 200 zuz, and a carcass that's worth 50 zuz. So what's the halacha? Shezen notol chatzi achai v'chatzi ames, v'zen notol chatzi achai v'chatzi ames. So what's the halacha? Everything is halved. Right? So essentially you're selling off everything, and you're going to go ahead and each party takes 50% of the damaging live animal, and each party takes 50% of the carcass. Right? That's the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek. Good. So let's analyze a bit. Says the Gemara Tanra. So the Bryce says, shar shav masayim shnaga shar shav masayim. Right. So again, we'll say you have a shar. Reuven shar is worth 200 zuz. Goes and damages Shimon shar that's worth 200 zuz. Right. And what's the halacha? Good. And in this case, we'll say again, you have a carcass that is worth 50. So now Shimon shar, dead shar, is worth 50 zuz. So what's the halacha? Zenotol chatzi achai v'chatzi ames. Zenotol chatzi achai v'chatzi ames. V'zeu shara amar b'torah di Rabbi Yehuda. So we'll say, Rabbi Yehuda says, the biblically paradigmatic case ultimately is where, again, essentially you have two equal value shvarim that go ahead, right? Reuven shar injures Shimon shar and are dead, Now you have again a full 200 zuz shar, and then you have a carcass worth 50 zuz. What do? Sell everything off, half everything. Rabbi Meir says, no. Ein zeh shar amar batar. Suppose to say, what they're arguing about over here is what is the biblically paradigmatic case. So Rabbi Meir says that is not the paradigm. What's the paradigm? Ela shar shav masayim shenagach shar shav masayim ve'ein hanavela yafet klum. The paradigmatic case, supposed to say, is where there's total loss from the damaged party. Total loss. And therefore, again, what I'm left with over here is halacha l'maisa. All I'm left with is a damaging animal. That's all there is. So al zen ne'emar umachra es hashar hachai v'chatzu es kapo. Also, what I'm left with over here is you take the living ox and you go ahead and you half it. You half it. So here's the problem. Rabbi Yehuda works very beautifully. Why does Rabbi Yehuda work very beautifully? Because the psukim seem to indicate that, right? The pasuk talks about two things. The pasuk talks about selling a living ox, which is the damaging ox, halving it, and then it says you also half the carcass. So Rabbi Yehuda's model makes a lot of sense. Sell off the living damaging ox, sell off the carcass, half everything. Rabbi Meir says, no, that's not the biblically paradigmatic case. The biblically paradigmatic case is a case of what? Where again, Reuven Shar injures Shimon Shar. Shimon Shar is dead. How much is Shimon Shar's worth? How much is Shimon Shar? Say that 10 times fast, right? Yeah. How much is Shimon's Shar worth? How much is it worth? 0. Total loss. And what's the paradigmatic case of Chatzin Ezek? Sell off the living Shar and they split it. The only problem with this is, Rabbi Meir, what do you do with the pasuk that says, Mani mekayim megames hames yechatzu? What do you do with the phrase that says they split the value of the carcass? The pasuk does say that. What do you do with that? To which the Gemara says, Pachas. The Gemara says, Vegames hames yechatzu, Pachas shepachsu misa machtzin b'chai. So I'll say what it means is, look at Rashi for just a moment. Pachas shepachsu misa machtzin b'chai. Kilomar, nevela lo sheicha gabi mazik klal. So I say essentially, if there is a carcass, what we do is we look at the depreciation ultimately of a carcass. How much is a living animal worth compared to a carcass? And ultimately, again, the damager gives the victim that value in the value of the living animal. All right, let me say a little bit better. Look at Rashi once more. Literally, again, the depreciation that there is from a living animal, ultimately, again, to now a carcass, that amount is given to the victim, or is allocated to the victim in the value of the living animal. All right, a little bit better way to say it. Rashi says, Kilomar, let me read Rashi once more. Kilomar, nevela lo shaycha gabe mazik. Right, again, the damager generally has nothing to do with the carcass of the animal. We look at an avela. How much less is an avela worth? From the time, right? So in other words, we look, a living animal is worth X, right? A carcass is worth X minus Y. We take that differential, and what happens? We take that amount. The mazik, the damager, gives the victim half of that. Because it's chatzi nezek, and again, he allocates that value where? In the value of the living animal. So we'll say. So it's interesting to notice as follows: when we say they sell off the living animal and everybody gets half, it's not totally true. What happens? We start off with half, right? But then the damager gives up from his half what? The amount, the difference in value between a living animal and a carcass. That amount is then allocated ultimately again to the damaged party. Very interesting. So we'll say, this is really like a shtickle riveting, no? I'm saying like it's fascinating. So here's the good news. The good news is the victim is going to be, remember, I should take it back. I was going to say the victim is going to be made whole. But that's not true. Why is that not true? Remember, this is Chatzi Nezek. So in Chatzi Nezek, remember, we'll say everybody's losing, right? Everybody's losing in Chatzi Nezek. So we'll say, so Lamaisa, but what is happening over here is as follows. See, in Rabbi Yehuda's model, what happens over here is like this. You have two bodies of compensation. You have a living animal and a carcass. Essentially, sell them both back. In Rabbi Yehuda's model, what do? 50-50, right? Split them 50-50 both. In Rabbi Meir's model, we essentially don't really deal with this. We don't bring in the carcass, but we kind of do. What we do is you take a living animal, you split it 50-50. But there's another cheshbon. What's the cheshbon? If you're Shimon, you have now a dead cow. dead ox. So what do? We look at the difference between the value of an avela and a living animal. That value Shimon is entitled to. Where does Shimon get that value from? That comes from Ruvain's 50% of Ruvain's animal. So there's like two allocations over here. There's a 50-50 allocation, and then out of Ruvain's bucket, out of Ruvain's chelik of 50%, Shimon now gets the depreciation between a living animal and a dead animal. Really interesting. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Michti, both say last three lines on the daf, the white lines, Michti, Ben Rabbi Yehuda, Hai mea ve'esim v'chamisha shakel, v'hai mea ve'esim shakel. So we'll say, at the end of the day, what's interesting to note is, it sounds like either way you're going to get paid, right? In other words, the allocation would seem to be the same. So the Gemara says, "My benaya, what's the practical difference between them?" Amarava pachas nevela ike benaya. So we'll say, no, actually, where this comes up, we'll say, is where after the damage is done, the carcass depreciates. Look at Rashi. Last Rashi. The pechas benaya in pichsu damel mishas misad shas nechira. Rabbi Meir da amar lo shayich mazik benevela pachas denizako avivelo yoivle elachatzi mash pachas misa. Shavuos is actually very interesting. You know where the nafkamina is? We've actually seen this already a number of times. Where Rabbi said there is carcass depreciation after the animal is killed. So who bears the brunt of depreciation between the time of death and ultimately time of adjudication? According to Rabbi Meir, that's on the damaged party. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that is shared. Amrli Abai says, I'm sorry, Rabbi Meir Samar Pachas Nebel Dinizakavi. Rabbi Meir holds that ultimately again, carcass depreciation ultimately again is going to be on the Nizak. Rabbi Yehuda Savar Pachas Nadela Demazekavi. So Demazekavi Balga. So ultimately again, Rabbi Yehuda says that Allah Chalamaisa, they're going to share that amount. Abai says, Imkain, Matzil Rabbi Yehuda, if that's the case, according to Rabbi Yehuda, will say something very interesting occurs. Amud Beis, Matzil Rabbi Yehuda, Tam Chamar Mimuad. So I will say, this is very interesting. According to Rabbi Yehuda's model, then, it turns out that there actually may be a stringency of Tam over Muad. Now I will say, how? Look at Rashi. First Rashi on 34b, Tam Chamar Mimuad, to Hagabe Muad Arina Parakamon, Bailim Metaplim Benavela, so I will say this is interesting. Everyone agrees. Everyone seems to agree that by a muad, ultimately again the owner is the owner of the nevela. The victim is obligated to take care of the carcass and to recapture whatever amount he can from the carcass. Right? I will say, remember again. Let's take a step back. Muad. What is payment in a muad case? Payment in a muad case. Nezek shalim, complete damages. But remember again, we offset complete damages by what? By the value of the carcass. Who is responsible for carcass disposal? We spoke about this before. Who's responsible for that? The damaged party, the nizar. Which also means that carcass depreciation is borne by the nizak as well, by the damaged party. The Rabbi say, now what's interesting about this is as follows. So it turns out that in the case of muad, listen to this. The damaged party is responsible to dispose of the carcass and recapture the money from carcass, and carcass depreciation is solely borne by the damaged party. Yet, according to Rabbi Yehuda, by Tam, it sounds like again carcass depreciation is borne by both of them, which then sounds like that there is a stringency that Tam has over Muad. How fascinating is that? So the Gemara says, so maybe you'll say, yeah, maybe there is. Maybe there is an element in which Tam is going to be more chamer than Muad. So the Gemara says, but here's the problem. Rabbi Yehuda says, Tam chayif umuad pater. Rabbi Yehuda says ultimately again that Tam will be chayif. Now we'll say, now there is another stringency. Look at Rashi. Rabbi Yehuda Tam chayif im shamru shmira pechusa v'yatza ve'ezek umuad pater. So we'll say it's actually interesting that Allah Chalamaisa by a Tam. Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to get into this. Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that Allah Chalamaisa, if the owner only watched the animal in a minimal way, ultimately, again, the animal gets out and does damage. The owner will be chayiv, but yet by muad he'll be patar. So the Gemara says, "Emar deshamas le'Rabbi Yehuda le'inyan shmira t'chsivi kroi." So we'll say it could very well be that there's a distinction when it comes to watching the animal. That maybe there is this distinction between tam and muad. However, le'inyan tashlumin mishamas le. But also when it comes to compensatory payments, Could it be that tam is more chamer than muad? But I will say, but that's what it sounds like over here. But that would be a very strange reality. But Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yachol shor shaveh mona shenagach shor shaveh chamishim sloim. Suppose to listen to this. What chamish sloim? Sorry. What happens if a shor that is worth 100 zuz goes ahead and gores a shor, right? That is worth chamish sloim. Vanavela yofe sela. And now again, the carcass is only worth 4 zuz a sela. So what's the halacha? Ze notal chatzia meis v'chatzia. I'm sorry. Ze notal chatzia chai v'chatzia meis. This one takes half of the living animal, half of the dead animal. Ze notal chatzia chai v'chatzia meis. So the Gemara says, Amrit v'chi muad lama yotze lahachmir alav lahakil alav. I don't understand when an animal becomes a muad. I will say, what's the ramification of becoming a muad? Is becoming a muad there to be machmir, to be mekel? Havi Omer lahachmir alav. I will say, obviously, the muad designation is to make things more chamer, not to make things mekel. Uma muad eno mashalim ela mashehizik. So I'll say, if a muad only goes ahead and pays what it damages, tam akal koshkin, so tam all the more so. El Rabbi Yochanan shevach nevela ikebenayo. I will say, actually, the distinction might be in the case where halacha l'maisa, that ultimately, again, the carcass appreciates. That actually may be the fundamental distinction between them. So the Gemara says, the Meir holds the nizakavi, that appreciation belongs to the damaged property, the damaged party, i.e. the owner of the carcass. Umar Savar, the right Rabbi Yochanan will say, Palga. Ultimately, and will say that what? Sorry, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda will say that ultimately, again, that is divided. So it's Vahayim the Kakashi the Rabbi Yehuda, and this was the kasha. Hashta da Amrit Chas Rachmana Iluye Demazik. The Shakal B'Shivcha. So we'll say now that we said ultimately again that the Torah even has some compassion upon the mazik, upon the damager, that he goes in and he takes part of the appreciation of the nevela. Yachol shor shaveh chamish sloim shenagach shor shaveh mana. So we'll say if you have a shor that went ahead and was worth 5 sloim, right? So we'll say and it goes ahead and it gores a shor that is worth a mana. Vanavela yafeh chamishim, and ultimately again the carcass is worth 50 zuz, chamishim zuz. Zen noto chatzia chai v'chatzia meis. Each one takes half of each animal. Amrit, Hechan Matzinu, Mazik Niskar. I will say if that's the case, then really the Mazik, the damager, is coming out of shtickle ahead. So the Gemara says, Shazen Niskar, Hechan Matzinu, Mazik Niskar, Shazen Niskar Va'omer, Shalim Yishalim Bailim. So Gemara says, Shalim Yishalim, Bailim Yishalmin, Vein Bailim Notlin. The idea I will say is that the owner of the damaging animal is supposed to be paying. He's not supposed to be walk away, benefited from this transaction. So my va'omer, what does it mean va'omer? V'chitema hanimi dehechadika b'seidel nizak. Maybe that's only in the case where the damaged party suffers a loss. Aba hecha deleka b'seidel nizak. But in a case where there is no loss to the damaged party, could go. Shar shaveh chamish sloim shenagach shar shaveh chamish sloim vanavelu yafeh shloshim zuz. For example, I will say in a case where a shor worth 5 sloim, gored a shor that is also worth 5 sloim, and ultimately again the nevela still retains some value. Yafesh shloshim zuz. So the Gemara says shakel nami mazik b'shivcha. Perhaps you would say that ultimately again the damager still shares in some of the appreciation. V'omer shalim yishalim bailim mishalmin vein bailim notin. I will say again. One thing that is clear, the Gemara says, is the owner, the damager, is not going to share ultimately again in the appreciation of the carcass. Here's the problem. The way this is set up then is that it could turn out that a tam would actually pay more than chatzi nezek in a particular case of appreciation. To which the Gemara says, TORAH amro, umachra es hashar hachai b'chitzves kapo. But yet the Torah itself says that lamaisa, they will sell the living shor, right, and go ahead and split the money. So chatzi nezek. So the Gemara says, Isli Rabbi Yehuda, pach, so the Gemara says, TORAH amro, umachra es hashar hachai b'chitzves kapo. Isli Rabbi Yehuda, pacha shepich samisa machzin. So we'll say, where does he learn out ultimately again that even halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you split the depreciation. So that comes from that phrase v'games hamesiach. So we'll say that's the same drush in Amud Aleph. I b'ha'afker Yehuda v'zen notel chatzi achai v'chatzi hameis v'zen notel chatzi achai v'chatzi hameis. But Yehuda used that before to teach us that halacha l'maisa, you split the living animal and the dead animal. Imkein nichtov kra ve'es hameis. If that's the case, the pasuk could have just said Vesames, my v'gam. Both say, what does it mean when it says v'gam? Shema min atarti. That comes to include both drushes. Okay. I'm saying, I know we went a little bit fast, but let me say again. So what are we emerging with from here? So Rabbi say, so just to point out over here, what's fascinating, and what I want you to take from this sugya, Rabbi say, is a fundamental machlokes, ultimately again, in how we are structuring the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek. That's what's coming out of here. And it's a machlokes ultimately again of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. In Rabbi Yehuda's case, the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek is you have animals, just to keep it easy, you have animals of the same value, right? Reuven's animal damages Shimon, and Rabbi will say there are two pockets or two buckets of payment. What are they? The living animal, which is the damaging animal, and the carcass. What does chatzi nezek say? Sell them both off, and split both. That Rabbi Yehuda says is the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek. Rabbi Meir is saying, no, that's not the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek. What's the paradigmatic case of chatzi nezek? Ultimately, again, total loss. Reuven's shar kills Shimon. There's no right carcass is worth 0. So what do? You take the living animal. What do? You sell it off and 50-50. Rabbi Meir. So what do you do with the phrase? The Torah, however, Torah itself says that what? You take the carcass. What do you do with the carcass? You split it. So Rabbi says, so according to Rabbi Meir, ultimately again, what is meis yachtzun? What does that come to teach us? What is that for? That's talking about Rabbi say that remember there is still a carcass. A carcass, right? There's always a carcass, right? I will say, and a carcass is always what? Worth something. So where does that come in? I'll tell you where that comes in. Or according to Rabbi Meir, where does that come in? What we do is we look at that amount. So we'll say, essentially, according to Rabbi Meir, here's what you have. You take the living animal, split it. Reuven gets 50%, Shimon gets 50%. Okay, done. Now, chelik bezes, what do? We take Shimon's carcass. Not Shimon's carcass, Shimon Shar's carcass. And I will say, what do we look at? How much is it worth now? How much was it worth? We have that differential. Where does that payment come from? It comes from Reuven's 50%. From Reuven's 50%. So I'll say, so that's what I want you to take out of the sugya. Fundamental machlokes, ultimately again, how we view the paradigmatic case, ultimately again, of chatzi nezek. Now I will say, what you also see over here, and again, we're going to come back, we're going to see this halacha a little bit later on as well. We also see, I will say, what happens with carcass appreciation or depreciation. So here's what we know. When a carcass, so I'll say, so first of all, one other piece that's important is in terms of disposition of the carcass, that's the right term, right? Disposition of the carcass. So remember again, I'll say, it is clear, everyone agrees that lamaisa on a muad, so the owner of the carcass is obligated to take care of the carcass. Right? By muad, he's obligated, and because he's obligated, therefore, again, any appreciation or depreciation of the carcass solely is borne by the damaged party. What we also see, I will say, is when there is carcass appreciation or depreciation in the case of tam, that's where there's a machlokes. So just keep that filed. Machlokes, carcass appreciation or depreciation by tam. Well, we haven't resolved that yet. We'll see what happens next. We'll say Mishnah. Let's get one more Mishnah. Says the Mishnah. I'll have to do today. Yesh. Chay is great Mishnah actually. Yesh chayiv al ma'aseh sharo patra ma'aseh atzmo. We'll say there are some times where you are chayiv for what your shar does, but yet if you did the same case, you'd be pater. Okay, right? You did the same actually, you'd be pater. So the verse says al ma'aseh sharo v'chayiv al ma'aseh atzmo. Right? I'm sorry. Just the opposite. Patra ma'aseh sharo v'chayiv ma'aseh atzmo. And then there are other times where if your shar did something, you're pater, but ultimately again you would be chayiv for the same action. Let's get an example. It's Ketzad. Sharo shabiyesh p'tura, pater. Let's say my shar humiliated someone. Now what does that mean? My shar injured someone in a way that caused humiliation. So what's the halacha? Pater. Remember again, we'll say there's no boshes by a shar. Right? Why is there no boshes by a shar? Because boshes requires mazid. Right? Mazid or karvel mazid. But who should be chayiv? Yet if I embarrass someone, if I injured someone in a way that causes humiliation, right, and it was intentional, I am chayiv boshes. Next, shorosh shesimas ein avdo ve'pil sheno pater. We'll say if my shar goes ahead and injures an eved. Let's say my shar gars my eved kinani. And then we'll say, what's the halacha? If you blind the eye or knock out the tooth of your eved kinani, what happens? He goes free. So let's say my shar injures my eved kinani. So what's the halacha? Pater. So we'll say, so pater, meaning I will say that ultimately, shar shesimes ein avdo ve'pil sheno pater. Right? So if my shar goes and injures my eved, so ultimately again, there's no liability, and obviously the eved doesn't go free. If I go ahead and knock out the eye or the tooth of my eved, there's liability and there's also emancipation. So let's listen to this. If my shar injures my mother or my father, I am liable to pay my parent, right? But if I chas v'shalom injure my mother or my father, I am pater from payment. So why am I pater from payment? Because I'm zechi of nisa, right? If you injure your parent, if you purposely injure your parent, there is death penalty. So remember, whenever you have dual liability, death penalty and financial liability, we have a concept of kimle b'derabimine. Ultimately, you get the more severe punishment. So in this case, there'd be a death penalty. When there's a death penalty, the financial liability is set aside. Shoro shehidlik es hagodish b'Shabbos. Most interesting case. Let's say my ox ignited a field on Shabbos. Chayiv. Ultimately, again, I'll be liable to pay for the damages of my shar. But who shehidlik es hagodish b'Shabbos? Let's say Reuven, the owner of the shar, he lit the field. He lit Shimon's field on fire on Shabbos. Rabbi say potter. Ultimately, he's pater. And I will say, now, why is he pater? Why is he pater? Same thing. Because remember, again, kindling a fire on Shabbos is a chiyav misa, right? Is a death penalty. And therefore, Allah l'maisa, because he's going to be put to death, therefore he's exempted from financial liability. Pater mipnei shumis chayev benafsho. Ultimately, I will say he's going to be pater. Why? Because l'maisa, he has gone ahead and he is liable to a death penalty. So Rabbi says, it's just an interesting idea. As much as generally, again, a person is obligated for the damages of his shar, the Gemara is just pointing out over here that it's interesting to see certain cases in which my shar would be pater, I'd be chayiv, and certain cases in which my shar would be pater, ultimately, in certain cases in my shar would be chayiv, ultimately, again, I would be pater for the same. So I'm also going to stop over here for today. I'm going to be Am Yisroel leaving for Yisrael today, Am Yisroel. So Thursday, Friday, Rabbi Richter is going to be Am Yisroel giving shir, and then I hope Am Yisroel to be virtual with all of you starting on Sunday. Am Yisroel through the rest of Chanukah, Am Yisroel. So we'll be separated by a little bit of geographic distance, Am Yisroel, but as always, united at the Neshama. All right, Rabbi says Shkoyach.